finances are in the pits, my kids are all sick, and to top it all off, my wife is thinking about leaving me. What on earth is God doing in my life?
I was in Portland, Oregon, which is in the United States, in the northwest corner. And I was speaking to about 3,000 pastors for a week. And on the second day, a shorter man, about this tall, very brown, very tan, healthy-looking man came up and said, "Do you understand John 15?" Out of the blue. I wasn't talking about John 15, and I said, "I understand parts of it, and parts of it I don't." This was part I didn't. And he said, "Would you like to understand?" "Oh, yes." He said, "I am a third-generation owner of a vineyard." And I know. "Oh, I'll buy you lunch." So we went to lunch. And he said, "What part do you not understand?" I said, "I don't understand the part of take away. Would you like to know?" "Yeah. My father and I do this all the time." "You do what?" "We take it away." Talk about being set up. You take it away? Yeah, we take it away. And then he said, "Here's what happens." Woo. He said, the wind blows and the rain happens and the branch gets knocked off the trellis and it falls down into the dirt. And when it falls down into the dirt, he said, the wind blows and guess what happens to the leaves? He said, it gets all dusty and the sun can't get to it. And if it stays there and it rains, it gets mildewy and it starts to get sick. What do you do? I said, "Do you cut it off and throw it away?" He said, "What? We spent years growing that branch. Throw it away?" And I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, my dad and I go around with boots on." "You do?" "Yeah, a couple times a year. And we have a pail. We have a pail with water in it and a rag. We wash it off." That's right. And he said, "We come over to this branch that's not doing very well. And we take it and we dip it in the water and we carefully wash it off and we dry it off and we lift it up. And we put it back on the trellis so the sun can come back so it can start bearing some fruit." Now I got it. Oh, when I'm in the process of getting in the dirt and not bearing any fruit, the Father's in the process of washing me off. "Come on, son, get out of the mud. Come on, let me lift you back up." "I don't want to be lifted up." "Well, okay." Oh, I bought him not only lunch, I bought him dessert. That made all the sense in the world to me. Then I went back and studied the Greek word and found that it does mean lift up. And if you lifting up and going somewhere, that's where the concept of take away was. But that's not literally what it means. It means to lift it up. And if you're just standing there, you lift it up. If you lift it up and you go away, you can maybe say to take away with you, but it's implying the wrong thing. It's just to clean it off. That's why in the next verse, Jesus says, "You are already clean for the word that I spoke to you." Same idea. My word washed you off. So how's this work? From the period of time that I'm not bearing fruit, he's in the process of cleaning me up and trying to get me back on the trellis if he'll let me, if I'll let him. Got it? Is this about salvation? No. It's every branch in me that doesn't bear fruit. And he's only talking to the believers, his apostles. It has to do with his theme. It's fruit. I chose you to bear fruit. And some of you have no fruit, and some fruit, and more fruit, and much fruit. It's all about fruit. And if you're not bearing fruit, my dad's going to get active in your life. When? I'm not sure. But he'll promise you he will. Okay. How many of you would say, That helped a lot. Yeah, good. 5.3. In the vineyard, airo means to lift up and take away from the ground to tie it on a trellis. That's what it means. The vine dresser doesn't destroy a branch, but restores it to make it fruitful. Star 5.5. The take away cannot mean to cut off and throw away due to the verb tenses. The tenses. What do I mean by the tenses? Does not bear in that verse, every branch in me that does not bear is, underline this, a present active participle, which means it's continuing to happen. Every branch that continues not to bear fruit, that's what that means. But it's the next verb is also in the present active. And it says, takes away is the present active, meaning it's continuing to go on. Star the next line and circle it. If takes away meant to cut off, it can only happen once. And it's not. It's continuous. Because you can keep falling back into the mud, and he could wash you off or lift you up, and you could force yourself off the trellis, get back into the mud, and guess what he does? He kneels down and say, really? You want to do this again? 5.6. What do we call this process then? 5.6. The term describing God's action on the disobedient person is chastening. That's the biblical word to use. What does God the Father do to not a branch now? Look up here. I'm not really a branch. Am I? Of course not. And Jesus really isn't a stick. Right? And I'm not really doing grapes. What is all this? It's a figure of speech, isn't it? I don't fall in dirt, but I do get dirty by my sins. So be careful that you don't make a figure of speech into be something that it's not. It's trying to teach a big idea to us. So when we think about that, I now understand that if a branch gets into the dirt, the vine dresser comes along with a bucket of water, washes it up and lifts it up. Okay, but I'm not a branch literally, and I'm not in the dirt literally, and somebody isn't taking my hands and washing my hands and my body because the dirt, that's not happening. Okay, what is happening then? What's the truth behind it? The truth behind it is I, as a believer, are living kind of in sin. I am. And I'm not really bearing good work because I don't want to. What does he do? He gets after me. And he wants to clean me up. He wants me to get back on track and move over here. That's what he does. What is that process of God working in the life of a Christian who is disobedient for a period of time? It's called chastening. It's what your parents hopefully did to you. Probably your mother more than your dad. Okay, so let's go on this. This makes sense? Good. Number 6, the father chastens a believer who's unfruitful due to their sinful lifestyle. Number 7, the father continues chastening as long as the believer chooses not to bear fruit. Wow. When does chastening end? Yeah, when you stop sinning and you start doing what's right. So who determines when chastening begins? You or God? No. You do. Just stop sinning and he won't get started. Isn't that nice to know? Because is chastening fun for anybody? No. Oh, chastening is not fun. It's painful. Mm-hmm. So who determines when it stops? I do. How do I stop it? Don't ask him, please stop. He'll say no. Get out of the mud and I'll stop. Okay. Then it stops. When you start sinning, how soon does he start chastening? No one knows. Nowhere in the text of all the verses of the Bible does it answer that question, because God treats everybody and every part of your life when you aren't bearing fruit differently. And sometimes he gives you quite a bit of time. And other times he said, I already taught you this before. And it's not much time then. Making sense? Okay, good. So let's move over this then to number 2. If you continue not to bear fruit, what does God do in response? Answer, chastening. And we now have a passage here that answers a lot of questions, like what does he really do? If you continue not to bear fruit, what does God do in response? And this passage tells you. You have forgotten something. You've forgotten an exhortation which speaks to you as sons, as children of God. My son, he's quoting the Old Testament now. You forgot the Old Testament exhortation which says this. My son, do not despise the chastening of whom? What does despise mean? It means looks down. I don't care. Nor be, because you can be discouraged when you're being punished or chastened. When you are rebuked by him, for whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, if you process through it and get back up where you should be, God deals with you as with sons. For what son or daughter is there whom a father does not chasten? Now this is a shocking sentence. But if you are without chastening, of which all believers? All. What does it say? Whoa. All have become partakers. If you don't have any, oh man, look what the Bible says. Read it with me. Then you are illegitimate and not sons. Therefore, what percentage of believers have been chastened? All. Have you? If you haven't been chastened, please raise your hand. If you haven't been chastened, you're not born again. So, that's kind of shocking. You're going to learn what God's been doing in your life because some of you have been hanging around the no fruit for a long time. And you've never put together that all the suffering you've been going through, a lot of it's connected to him chastening you because you won't get out. And you don't think he even knows or is doing anything. Man, is he doing stuff and it's not pleasant. Number 1, God's chastening is a universal experience of all born-again believers. Universal for all believers. That's what the text says. Number 2, God's chastening is from his position as our Father, who is gracious and loving. Number 3, God's chastening refers to his intervention in your life to mature and stimulate fruitfulness. God's chastening process. This is an important sentence. God's chastening processes through 3 stages according to our response. According to our response. What do I mean by that? If you're disobeying at the dinner table at your house and your parent says you need to stop doing that and you stop, will chastening continue from your mom or dad? Why not? You stopped. Okay. Guess what? If you continue to disobey, what will your parents do? They will heighten this a bit. And if you grit your teeth, and I'm not going to. Whoa. I had 5 brothers and sisters, and there were 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and my mom and my dad. And if you started misbehaving, there was 8 of us around the table. And if you started disobeying, which happened quite frequently in our home, you'd watch my mother's eyebrow. It was this one. I don't know how. I've asked her, how do you do that? She made this eyebrow move up. This one didn't move. This one moved up. And she didn't really look at you much. She just kind of went like this. And the eyebrow moved. And you knew, this is a warning from my brow to you. And if you continue to do this, you'd hear my father go this. He was saying, didn't you see your mother's eyebrow? And if one of us continued to do this, my father, very calmly, would look up and he'd call you by your first name and then your middle name. Like my brother's name is Gordon and his middle name is Thomas. So he would typically call him son or Gordon. And if he continued to go past the eyebrow and the cough, he'd say, Gordon Thomas, meaning, really? You're going to continue doing this? And then and sometimes each one of the kids, we would just be fools. And we continue in whatever it is that we should. And my father would say, well, all right then, go ahead and wait for me in your bedroom. Oh, that was trauma. Oh, that was bad. Because you knew, before it's all over, my father would take off his belt and come in and say, you know, son, this hurts me more than it hurts you. And I remember saying, Dad, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. Well, guess why we all do that? Nobody trained you to have levels of chastening. We all are hoping the other person will respond. Guess where that comes from? That comes from God, who gives us opportunities. Come on. You saw my eyebrow. You heard my cough. I used your middle name. Really? Really? So take a look at that chart beneath there. God's chastening processes through 3 stages according to our response. Now, wait till you see this. This changed my life, what I'm going to show you, at 2 o'clock in the morning. I remember when this happened. The stages of chastening, the type of chastening, and what do you experience when God does that to you? We'll go back to this passage. That's where this is coming from. Don't be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. That's like this. Where you know, uh-oh, that's rebuke. Rebuke. Stage 1 is light chastening. How does this happen? A verbal chastening, it's discomfort. You could hear a preacher talking and you know God's getting to you. Number 2, the chastening. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens. He chastens. It's more severe than that. It's medium chastening. And I have the word chasten because that's the one the Bible uses. That's harder. That's more emotional chastening happening in your life, and your life gets full of distress. And you didn't put together. This is God the Father doing this to you. He wants you to stop because you didn't hear him. You heard him, but you said no. And here's the part that chastened that really got to me, because the text says there's something worse than this. It's heavy. And it's scourges. Oh. God the Father scourges believers. Yes. And that's substantial chastening, and that's when it's desperate in your life. So I looked down and looked up those words. What does it mean to get rebuked? What does it mean to get chastened? What does it mean to scourge? 4.1, rebuke means to receive God's rebuke through verbal and written means. God will rebuke you in the Bible. Matthew 18:15, moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault. That's rebuke. It's when God tells you your fault. Between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained a brother. It's when you know it in your heart. 4.2, chasten means to receive God's child training. That's what the literal word means, child training, and includes often stronger discipline. Hebrews 12:9 uses the same Greek word of chastening when it says this, furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us. That's the word, chasten. And we paid them respect. Should we not be much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? And here's the part that changed my life. 4.3, scourge means to receive God's severe discipline, including major suffering. So here's what I did. I looked up that Greek word behind scourge, and I read every place it's used in the Bible, and I became afraid. I mean, literally. I became afraid. Look at the verse beneath it, Matthew 10. But beware, said Jesus, of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you. Remember when the Bible says Jesus was scourged? That's the same Greek word. Do you know what it means? To be whipped. And I became afraid. And I asked, this is what changed my life. I asked a question, kind of staggering around in my thoughts. Does God the Father really scourge Christians who won't obey? They won't, so he scourges them? Like my dad did? And I thought, no, he doesn't do that. He's a loving God. Yeah, but my dad loved us. And we just forced him in a sense that we weren't going to do right until he brought that scourging. And I asked God a question sitting in my chair, 2 a.m. God, have you already scourged me? And then I looked at the text, and this is what changed my life. And scourges every son. And then I sat there and I thought back to the times in my life when I was bearing no fruit for a period of time and I wouldn't break. And I remember the suffering that I went through and never connected my suffering with my rebellion. Never did until that moment. And I realized, no wonder the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. Fear of what God? Of his discipline of me. And because we're preaching about the love of God to a bunch of people who are bearing no fruit, week after week after week after week, and they never put together why their life is falling apart. Is it always falling apart from scourging? Not always. But the vast majority, if you're bearing no fruit for a long time, the probable biblical answer is yes. Is all suffering from sin? No. And if you're doing some of these, maybe that suffering isn't connected to that. It's connected to something else we'll teach later today. But the vast majority of believers are stuck in number one, no fruit. He tried the rebuke. He tried the chastening. He even tried a lot of chastening. And then he said, well, all right then. How many of you can identify with this? Or am I the only one? Yeah. Number 5. God's chastening decreases in your life as you increase your holiness. Yep. You don't need to be chastened then. Part 3, now you know. Now you know. The first process of what God has been doing in your life. Number 1, many believers don't realize that God rebukes, chastens, and scourges every believer. That's what the text says. Number 2, many believers don't connect any of their suffering, or they can't find a job, or they keep getting in debt, on and on and on, to God's chastening. Number 3, many believers experience distress, difficulties, and I want you to underline the word you don't think fits. Sickness. Due to disobedience. You know what people think it's from? The sickness. It's from Satan. Where do you see the next session? The light's going to go on big time. Satan gets more credit for things he had nothing to do with. Number 4, many believers who fight against God's chastening invite God to make it more severe. If you keep fighting against him, he'll increase it. Not because he wants to or abusive. Because he loves you too much to let you keep doing that because you're not doing any of the things he created you to do. Number 5, many believers don't focus their lives on bearing fruit, and thus they rarely glorify God. I want to read a quote to you. Cavett Roberts said this, if we study the lives of great men and women carefully and we study them unemotionally, we find out that inevitably greatness was developed, tested, and revealed through the darker periods of their lives. One of the largest tributaries of the river of greatness is always the stream of adversity. And I don't know of any major man or woman of God that did not have a major period at least once in a life in which they did not bear any fruit. I don't know of any. Maybe there are some. I don't know of any.